Good afternoon, at least here in London for us at the Human Dignity Trust, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining this screening. My name is Taya Braun. I'm the director of the Human Dignity Trust, and we're really delighted to welcome you to this screening and discussion of our short film, A Wake-Up Call, Hate Crime Law to Protect LGBT People in the Commonwealth. We're especially delighted to be screening this film to mark Zero Discrimination Day today, which, as you may know, is a day to celebrate the right of everyone to live a full and productive life and to live it with dignity, and to help create a global movement to end all forms of discrimination. For anyone who's not already familiar with our work, the Human Dignity Trust uses the law to help defend the rights of LGBT people globally. And we do that through supporting strategic human rights litigation in courts around the world, and by providing technical legal assistance to willing governments for law reform, both to eradicate laws that criminalize LGBT people and to enact protective legislation. And one type of protective legislation that we help countries develop is hate crime legislation. At the moment, very few Commonwealth countries have legislation to recognize, prevent, and punish hate crimes, including those committed on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. But our research shows that every year, millions of LGBT people across the Commonwealth suffer physical, sexual, and psychological violence, as well as damage to their property and other types of crime, which is motivated by prejudice and hatred. And hopefully, if there's one thing we can all agree on, it must be that violence in any society is unacceptable. Addressing hate-motivated crime is therefore one important place to start. Old laws that we're all very familiar with that incite hatred and violence against LGBT people, including the laws that criminalize them, have to clearly be abolished. But also new laws specifically condemning prejudice-based violence can help to reset societal values and expectations. So the award-winning documentary that you're about to watch sits at the very center of the Human Dignity Trust's assistance to Commonwealth governments wishing to introduce new hate crime laws to tackle that pervasive violence that's faced by LGBT communities. And we think that compelling testimonies from activists and change makers across the Commonwealth, some of whom you'll hear from today, coupled with the really skillful and elegant storytelling by our brilliant filmmakers at the Good Side, really harness the power of film to inspire action and to press for change. So before we begin the screening, I just need to point out that the film does contain scenes of physical violence and mention of abuse and sexual violence against LGBT people, which some viewers might find distressing or traumatic. But with that word of caution, thank you for taking an interest in our work and in this important film. And I'll now turn to James from the Good Side to let you know how to watch the film.
Thanks, Taya. So I'm going to paste the link to the film in the chat so that you can watch it where you are without having any streaming issues. So in a moment, there's a chat box at the bottom. I'll paste it in there and you can go ahead and click the link. And we'll see you back here in 11 minutes. The film is 10 minutes and we'll give you an extra minute for people who might have poor internet connections. So if you come back early, please be patient and wait for us to return. And then we'll have a discussion and Q&A. So I'm pasting that in there now, and that will be, so 18 minutes past, I think we'll see you back here for discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your patience as we navigate this crazy Zoom world we all live in. But I hope very much that everybody enjoyed the film, and we very much look forward to hearing any reactions, comments, and questions. I'm going to pass over to the Human Dignity Trust's Head of Strategic Communications, Emma Eastwood, who will chair a brief panel discussion, followed by a Q&A session. So over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Taya. First and foremost, thank you to our panelists for your work and for your collaboration in making this film happen. We really do appreciate it. I'll shortly hand over to you all, so if you can unmute and put your videos on, and then you can introduce yourselves. But before I do so, just a few comments. I'm going to be asking each panelist a number of questions related to the film, and then there'll be around 15 minutes for questions from the audience. You can all do this, as somebody already has done, by using the Q&A and the chat function here on Zoom at any time. So do feel free to post your questions and I'll take them from there. Secondly, this will be a safe space for discussion. So the moderator reserves the right to eject people from this online space should any of the questions or comments in the Q&A be deemed offensive. So please do bear that in mind. So first of all, I'd like to just ask the panelists to introduce themselves along with their preferred pronouns. Fabiana, could you start?
Hi, my name is Fabiana Bon, pronouns they, them. I'm from Seychelles and I'm currently the chairperson for LGBTIC, the only NGO in Seychelles advocating with regards to sexual orientation and gender identity.
Thanks, Fabi. Gigi? You're on mute, Gigi. We can't hear you, unfortunately.
That's a shame. We could hear Gigi a second ago, couldn't we? But not now.
Caleb, do you want to go in the meantime whilst Gigi sorts out their sound?
Pronouns: me, him, they, who, it, and anything else you wish. Caleb Orozco, Executive Director, United Belize Advocacy Movement, running the oldest and only LGBT policy and advocacy-led organization in the country. Done.
Thank you. Gigi, do we have you wired for sound yet? Still can't hear you.
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm going to give you a few more moments to try and sort that out, and then I'll ask the first question and perhaps ask Fabiana and Caleb to respond to that first of all. So we've had a lot of insight in the film about hate crimes and oh, you're back. You're back.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
I think my earphones will have a problem. So hi everybody, sorry for that. This is Gigi from Kenya, Programs Officer at Jinsi Yangu, which is an intersex, transgender and gender non-conforming organization in Kenya, among other things. I am board chair of 2 lesbian, bisexual and queer-led community-based organizations. I'm also an independent consultant on matters sexuality, sex, gender, and expression in both Kenya and Africa. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Gigi. And James?
Hi, my name's James, he, his, and I'm head of production at The Good Side. I steer our projects and I produce this film. At The Good Side, we work across research, strategy and filmmaking so we can collaborate with our partners, take them from insight to behavior change strategies and storytelling with social change at the heart of everything we do.
Thanks, James. Taya already introduced herself at the beginning. Trina, do you want to say a quick hi? Remain behind your screen. Okay, we'll move into the first questions, which is for Gigi, Caleb, and Fabiana. We've had some insight into this in the film, but I'd like to ask all of you how hate crime or fear of hate crimes affects the everyday work and behaviour of activists like yourself and the wider LGBT population in your country. Fabiana, would you like to start?
So in Seychelles, there is a concern largely about hate speech, especially on social media, which is quite widespread and happens often. Our concern is that this affects especially the younger generation who's quite tech savvy and hangs out on social media a lot. So it has a negative impact on their mental health and it generally creates a feeling of fear and anxiety throughout the community. With regards to hate crimes specifically, we've had instances, as pointed out in the film in the past, and these are still not being recorded as hate crime and also not being investigated by the police, even though they are being reported. And what the message that this sends to the community is that if you encounter violence because you are gay, then the police is not interested to actually address this issue.
Thank you. Eugene?
So, and I completely agree with Fabiana, and just to add on to what they've said, some of the challenges that you'd find LGBTQ people in Kenya facing just based on fear of either the current legislation goes down to the basic of basics, and that is just human dignity. One, just enjoying their human dignity, being able to live as a human being, leave your house, go to look for work, go to buy food, go to access health, accessing education. So that is just the first part. And it starts from the family. So one, you cannot be accepted within the family. That means if you are underage, your family cannot support. Even if you're not underage, your family cannot support you in basically anything. Your family is the source of violence most of the time. And that is just at basic of levels. And then once you get out of family, you have your education, you have your health, you have to access to justice, you have a right to just commune and associate with persons that identify the way you identify. So even just social spaces to be able to hang out with people is impossible. Health services are there, but they're not cognizant, they're not contextualized to meet your particular needs. Access to justice, just from the point of reporting, is basically inaccessible and impossible. Inaccessible, one, because of fear; two, because of the response that law enforcement gives to persons who have gone to report cases of violations to them. Three is even if you find, for example, accepting officers in the rarest of cases, having them just take in your case and have the Justice Department of the courts being able to just review your case, also who is going to represent your case. So that is just some of the, and culturally as well, you find that conversion therapy has been completely embedded in the social structure of how LGBTIQ persons are treated in the society, in the community. So you'll find things, cultural practices such as FGM. I'm sorry to mention this for those who are a bit sensitive. For female genital mutilation is actually used as a form of punishment. For example, as I had mentioned, forced marriages is used as a form of punishment. You find persons being taken to our national mental health institution, which is called Madari, which is severely underfunded. It's actually just used as a prison, you know. We're having families take their own members to police stations to be beaten up so that they can be straightened. We're having families expose their persons, their LGBTQ identifying persons, to corrective rape. And this doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter. However, you'll find that LBQ persons are the ones who are suffering the most when it comes to, I don't like calling it corrective rape, to rape, yeah? So you find that basically every aspect of their fabric with regard to political participation, leadership, access to work, access to education, access to health, access to just basic human dignity treatment within the society, access to association. These are things that are completely cut off because of either existing legislation, penalizing legislation that has created that context catalyzes the context, and also just having a culture that has been completely integrated by colonial and post-colonial sort of attitudes, to a point that what the penal code says is what goes when it comes to the rights of LGBTIQ persons, regardless of our constitution being present, which is one of the best constitutions on the continent, regardless of us having, being part of various international and regional human rights instruments, such as the African Commission, such as the UPR. So the legal sphere is completely definitive, it completely defines how every other fabric affects directly or indirectly LGBTQ persons in Kenya.
Thanks, Gigi, for painting such a vivid picture. Caleb, we'll be talking about the law and potential changes in the law in Belize. But in terms of how you as an activist and the wider activist community and the wider LGBT community in Belize are affected by hate crime, can you tell us a little more?
In one sentence, it's war, and it's on. Whether it's walking into a police station and having them bite their tongue as they see me, bite your tongue, bleed, I say. I'm there to do a job. Or whether it's getting the commissioner of police to develop a police intervention policy on detainees and LGBT victims of violence. One has to recognize that there's trauma, and that trauma doesn't go away because you're strong, you're loud, you're proud. One has to recognize that the persons who experience violence, that trauma doesn't go away because they're crying in front of you. That trauma doesn't go away because, well, somebody produced a film or has a lawyer. It's constant work, and it's mitigating, it's understanding how trauma by itself is a barrier to access justice, but is also a barrier to discourage justice when you look at the duty bearers. I often wonder why I even bother, because it's a thankless job. It's a thankless job because so much of our populations are afraid of something. And what we don't realize is that the state isn't going to give us our freedom. They aren't going to give us systems of protection. You have to work for it, and you have to quarrel, and you have to fuss a few people, scold a few people, talk bad about a few people, and nobody ever makes change in being nice to a system that already says you don't matter in law. So my job is to remind the state that while the court acknowledged my dignity and rights, they have a responsibility to legislate it. And my responsibility doesn't stop until the day I die. So with that said, it's on. It's war, but you have to be smart about it and navigate the whole BS that comes with it.
Thanks, Caleb. Whilst I've got you and kind of moving from there, and thank you for that. This film was shot in 2019 in Belize when momentum was building for developing hate crime legislation, as we can see from the testimonies that were given by yourself and by Kim and other Belizeans. Can you give us all an update on the status of the introduction of hate crime legislation and what needs to be done to get it enshrined in law in Belize?
Well, first, the idiotic system. It always helps to have a godlike event like COVID to come interrupt the process. So what we realized is that national elections put a pause on it. A last minute call from the head of the Council of Churches put a pause on it. Then afterwards, lovely COVID came and interrupted the whole process. I personally have been engaging the Catholic bishop, the Anglican bishop, the Attorney General office, the Director of Public Prosecution, and basically trying to find out when we will get the ball rolling on advancing the Equal Opportunity Bill. So one part of government says, well, no discussion will start on before municipal elections. Well, municipal elections ended March 4th. So that's what I issued. Then on the other side, in meeting with the Minister of Human Development, she says, well, give me a time. We won't be able to have a serious conversation until October. Fine. So then there's this whole lack of discussion about when to table the EOB, And you begin to understand there's a level of uncomfortableness with these new politicians trying to represent. And so what we have is a pink ceiling. I call it a pink ceiling, where that uncomfortableness has to be broken. It has to be challenged. Niceties is one part of political engagement, but the time for niceties, in my mind, is over. And government has to be reminded that LGBT people are not there to be expendable in a small economy of 1.9 billion. We are human capital. If you want to argue the cold hard truth, um, we are human capital, and they need us to jumpstart an economy that was 45% dependent on tourism that has been damaged by COVID. So don't tell me that it isn't the right time. Tell me how I can help, or in this case, how my community can help to push forward. But outside of that, we've been having discussion on LGBT family legislation. We have scheduled a meeting on Social Security, and I've written a letter to the AG office, specifically to Solgen, copy to the AG, asking what is the official position with regards to Section 53 interpretation with regards to new legislation and old legislation. They said they have a few priorities to clear before they answer me, but I have news for them. They'll give me an answer in person or by letter. I will get an answer because they have no longer the right to put to hold my ruling hostage and to hold their responsibility in perpetuity and not expect me to bite back. I said bite back, not holler back, because when I holler back, it's going to be a framework of hollering, and I end there.
Thanks, Caleb. I'm sure it will do. Fabiana, you speak very compellingly in the film about the impact of hate crimes on LGBT people and the need for legislation, protective legislation in Seychelles. What would the impact be if hate crime legislation is enacted in Seychelles for you and your community?
For the LGBT community in Seychelles, I think it would send a clear message to the population that we are seen by the state, and the state finds it important to protect our rights, protect us from violence, as it does all other groups in society. And I think that is a very important message to send, especially to the younger generation that is coming up.
Thanks, Fabiana. And Gigi, turning to you, you touched on this in your really comprehensive and the picture that you painted. You obviously live and work in Kenya, where LGBT people are still criminalized. Within that context, why is it particularly important, you think, to highlight the issue and impact of hate crimes on the LGBT community?
Right. So I'm going to link my answer to the current court case that we're having, the one that we have lost. So we are currently in court challenging the constitutionality of sections 162 ANC and 165 of our penal code, which is basically copy-paste of all your penal codes, India, Belize. I mean, we're all colonized by the UK. So if you look at that section of the penal code, it's almost copy and paste in each country. So the problem with this is, one, the ruling that they gave is something that Fabiana has just touched on, and they've mentioned that there are, and I think it was also in the documentary, so the court said that there is no evidence to prove that there is discrimination and violence that is targeted towards LGBTQ persons in Kenya. But then again, due to lack of a non-discrimination and hate crime legislative bill, we do not have the infrastructure to even document cases of violations towards LGBTQ persons. So the evidence that we have is evidence that we are collecting within our organizations, and basically, which is not information that is admissible in court, because these have not gone through, the police system. They do not have the OB numbers. They're not recorded in law enforcement. And we can get into why they're not recorded in law enforcement, which is another whole conversation. But then again, due to, the discrimination, the stigmatization of LGBTIQ persons, the lack of a comprehensive sexuality and gender curriculum education that included in the police force curriculum. So we are finding that this infrastructure is completely not there. And because there's no legislative to actually push to actually promote the creation of, these tools, there's basically no guideline. All we have is our constitution, but we have no act of parliament, we have no bill. All we have to work with is our constitution, which is also a bit very vague when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity. It's clear on gender, but the binary of gender. It's not clear on gender identity with regard to its entire spectrum. So we've been engaging in international human rights mechanisms and to try and address this. So for the past 2 cycles in the UPR process, we've been having, just getting lobbying with our diplomatic corps from different countries that are allies, that are supporting our work either in Kenya or in advocacy spaces. And we had a number of recommendations. In the past, we were not quite experienced with our wording in that space. So every recommendation basically got a no, 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 no. But in the last UPR cycle, which Kenya went through, and this was in 2020 January, Kenya accepted 4 recommendations which were directly linked to non-discrimination with regard to gender and sexual orientation, and Kenya accepted 4. There were 18 recommendations, and Kenya accepted actually 3 and noted 1, and all of them were to do with having non-discrimination bill in place, which is still the same thing that I don't know if people in this space are cognizant of the Article 275 of the African Commission, which directly compels states to put in place a legislative act that speaks to and that is discrimination of LGBTIQ persons. This was passed in 2014. So just the lack of will and the impunity and the fact that LGBTIQ have been used as a negative political drive. And in Kenya, we're having our elections, general elections next year, which is something that is scaring the shit out of us. So just thinking about all those things, it is many reasons as to why it is important to have a comprehensive, non-discriminatory and hate crime legislature in this country for LGBTIQ persons specifically.
Thanks, Gigi. I think that you've touched on how as Kenyan activists you turn to international mechanisms when you lack them nationally. Taya, that brings me nicely to you to ask you what the role of the international community is, and particularly the Human Dignity Trust in this sense, in supporting the introduction of hate crime legislation in Commonwealth countries and beyond.
Thanks, Emma. I'd first say, clearly, and we've heard from 3 amazing local activists here today, the local experts and activists are the most important players in all of this. And the expertise, the passion, the experience is clearly coming through from all of them today. The international community, there are obviously multiple layers to that, but for us as the Human Dignity Trust, I think one of the things that we can do and have tried to do is to look at patterns around the Commonwealth and to do research that shows the experience and those patterns around the Commonwealth, and also the potential solutions around the Commonwealth and around the wider world. But in this case, we have focused on the Commonwealth. So for instance, the publications that we've produced, and 2 are specific to hate crime in the Commonwealth against LGBT people. One looking at the situational analysis. So what is the context in which hate crime occurs around the Commonwealth? What are the patterns? What are the different ways in which different members of the LGBTIQ community experience hate crime? And it is both similar and different depending on how you identify within that wider group. And it's important to look at those those differences as well as the similarities. So sort of having a global view on some of these issues and capturing that global view and the global experience in some of our research publications. The other one then, for us as lawyers in particular, is looking at what are some of the legal solutions, and in this case, hate crime legislation, which is almost non-existent around the Commonwealth for any type of hate crime, not just against LGBT people, but against people on the basis of race or religion or disability, other types of characteristics based on which people experience bias-motivated crime around the world. And so, you know, a deep dive that we did in our legal report on what are the potential legal solutions or legal ways of addressing this issue. What are the different forms of hate crime legislation? What are the pros and cons of those different forms? How do you implement hate crime legislation? What does it achieve? What can it do? What can't it do? So bringing together the intellectual resources to help support these amazing local advocates. And then another major role that we're trying to provide and fill is providing technical legal assistance where countries who become aware of these problems and become aware that there are potential legal ways of addressing it, that we can provide technical legal assistance in helping to develop those pieces of legislation. So we are drafting bills for various countries that have taken up the challenge and that do want to look at enacting hate crime legislation. And we do that both with our own internal expertise, but also drawing on a pan-Commonwealth group of experts that really do come from all around the Commonwealth, legislative drafters, experts in hate crimes, et cetera, to help provide a support base for people that do want to enact legal responses to some of these issues.
Thanks, Taya. So we've heard from local activists and the impact of the lack of these laws and the impact of hate crime on them. We've looked at the legal ways to address this issue. James, I'm going to turn to you to think about your views on the role of storytelling and change. So looking at using these techniques, using film, using storytelling. How can this impact on this particular issue?
Well, I mean, everything is story, isn't it? Everything we believe about the world, everything we believe about ourselves is a story that we've been told, that's been handed to us, or that we've formed. Being here and hearing stories like this is just so important. The best thing about stories is that you can change the narrative. It's a mountain to climb for sure. I mean, as we've heard, these stories, they exist embedded in our psyches and in our systems and in our laws. So it's important that we share our experiences. If people feel that they can, they feel safe enough and that they want to. We have to let people know that we've always been here. Sexual and gender difference is not new, but we have been demonized and hidden away and swept out of the history books. And obviously that's even more applicable in Commonwealth countries where colonialism has inflicted such damage, and that the invisibility is just even more serious. But there are people who do want to hear these stories. There are people who don't want to hear these stories, but there definitely are more people who are receptive. As people, we crave stories that connect us to what it means to be human, regardless of labels. So yeah, given how much we've been hidden from the public history, most people in the world don't really know queer people. So we have to capture these stories and we have to share them. There's so much resilience in visibility. And if you can show impact of all this harm and you can add hope and defiance, then it says that we're here and we're not going away. And what we've seen through our work, time and again, is on social problems and social issues, is that the power of real human stories is to really connect anybody to the heart of a problem. And if you can connect people using stories, then you can encourage them to think and behave differently, but have that rooted in empathy.
You keep saying we, and so I just wanted to kind of press a little more on that one. So you identify as a gay man. So what's been, what was your experience in making these films?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's never about me, but it is fascinating to make a film like this as a gay guy, because I mean, I just completely underestimated how emotionally overwhelming it would be, really. No amount of preparation readies you for hearing stories of hatred and violence from someone who's sitting right in front of you. And that's why, again, events like this are important, because as we've already, I'm sure everybody here who's attending has felt that from the stories we've heard already. But for me, yeah, they did echo some of my own experiences, but it bears no relation to the experiences that Fabi, Caleb and Gigi have to endure on a daily basis, and they hear these stories all of the time. So it took me quite a long time to engage with my identity, so connecting with queer people all around the world and making this film was a really great opportunity to learn about myself, my place in the world, my country's legacy. And on the the metaphorical queer totem pole, as a gay white man living in the UK, I sit right at the top, and these films really did activate me further into recognizing my responsibility to lift people up. I think as marginalized people, we have to lift up all marginalized people. Our empathy has to extend further than our own category. And we met so many inspiring people, and everybody spoke so often about wasted talent and missed opportunities. That was something that really resonated for me, the psychological impact of all this harm of being criminalized, stigmatized, and then unprotected. And then one of the things that kept coming up for me was I kept thinking about the time when hate crime legislation was introduced in the UK. And I looked it up this morning because I wanted to check when it was, and I think it was 1998. So I was 17. And I remember it happening, and I remember, even though I wasn't out, I remember genuinely feeling a lot safer. I'd been frightened for so long, like a small, softly spoken gay guy, bullied, not fitting in with masculine gender norms. I felt so vulnerable. And that when the hate crime legislation came in the UK, I did think, I felt empowered, and I felt like it helped me gain strength, actually.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, James, for that candid sharing there. Continuing with this idea of storytelling, I just wanted to ask Fabiana and Gigi and Caleb about how useful films can be for you locally, for your activism locally. How do films like this work for you? I know that you carry out a lot of advocacy, you're in courts, you're having meetings, but how useful are films for your work?
So I'll just start. It's just not even about, so films have a thing of delivering very hardwired sort of messaging, and that is the sort of conversation, the sort of dialogue, the sort of space, the sort of sensitization method that we actually would like to upskill, to strengthen in our advocacy. The work that we're doing is really good, yes. I mean, the high level advocacy, the national level advocacy, all the research, all the movement building, I mean, all this is very necessary. But then one thing that we always say is these politicians, these law enforcement officers, these judges, these lawmakers, all these, they are people coming from families, they're coming from somewhere. They just don't exist in vacuums, right? And these are people who have stories that they can relate to. And once we make people start understanding that we were just not born out of corn. We are people who belong to people, who belong to communities, who belong to society. So once we are able to just humanize our stories, it's just not, okay, fine, this year we have had 100 cases of violence. No, it's actually saying that this year, out of that 100 cases of violence, 20 were to do with this, and this was actually the lived realities of these 20 people, even if it's not them. These are the stories of people who've gone through similar experiences that they have, and this is how it has affected their lives. These are, because it's also not just about negative storytelling, it's also about positive storytelling. Look at examples of people who have been, for example, activist family whom have completely accepted me, and my mom is actually the only parent in Kenya needing PFLAG. So just using myself as an example of how much you can prosper, how much you can do, how much change you can bring if you can fully enjoy your rights, even if it's in the minimal of senses, just at home, being accepted. How far that goes, you know, just showing positive stories, showing negative stories, showing lived realities, you know, just the reality as it is on the ground, as crude as it is. It is very, very important in sending the message home. I mean, yes, we can give all the statistics and quantitatives and all these things we want to do, but if we do not have the lived realities of the people who these numbers reflect to, we are not reaching anyone. We are not making any change, because the change is to either continue with the support that is required, and for those that are giving examples of good practice, or give an opportunity of dialogue of, oh my God, what can we do to change this situation? Is this what you actually go through? What can we do to change this situation as the general population, as the general public? So for me, I think film is a very powerful tool in the kind of work that we're doing, especially in the kind of context that we're living in, because the people that we're working with, we come from a culture, as Africans, we come from a culture of drama. You know, even our history was always passed down through stories and poems and music, and it was not written, it was not academic. So it is so much easier for people that we work with to understand once they can visualize, relate with, empathize with, sympathize with something that they are listening to, seeing, and putting themselves in their shoes. And so yeah, film is a very powerful tool in the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Gigi. Fabiana, anything to add from the Seychelles context?
Often during our work as activists, I think what is lost is why we are doing all the work that we are doing. And you spend a lot of time trying to talk to politicians, policymakers, lawmakers, and it really disconnects to the community on the ground. And I think storytelling helps to humanize the community, humanize the stories, humanize the reason why we are doing the work that we do. And this further supports advocacy that we are actually doing in the country and also internationally. And in Seychelles, for example, when this short film that we just saw was released, it actually triggered the government to come forward and say, like, this is something that we want to address. We want to have legislation that addresses hate crimes in the country. And since then, there has been some work towards that. So basically the video became a rallying call and triggered positive action, so that there is positive change with regards to hate crimes in Seychelles. So for me, I would say it's very, very important to tell stories. Like, you can spend hours talking to people, but you show them a 10-minute video and it completely changes the mood, it changes the direction of the discussion.
Thanks, Fabiana. That's really heartening to hear that for us at the Trust, and I'm sure for those that are here at the screening today. I know that Caleb has to rush off to a meeting, and we're just about up with the time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to close and finish up now. Thank you to all of you for coming along to the screening, and a special thanks to Gigi, Fabiana and Caleb for your contribution to the film and for appearing on the panel today. And thanks, of course, to James and all the folks at the Good Side for making such a wonderful, impactful film. You'll all shortly receive an email with information on how to support the Trust's work and links to our reports on the ones that, that Taya was mentioning, for instance. And we'll also ask you to complete a really short survey about the event. We'd be really grateful if you could do that. Just take a few minutes to complete it, as it's really useful for our learning and our funding. And of course, please do share the film widely. We've recorded this this session, so we'll also be posting this up on our YouTube channel very soon, so you'll be able to catch the discussion again. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody, and have a lovely rest of day, evening, morning, and thank you very much for attending. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.
See you.
Lovely day. Bye.